speak and about Golden Eagle. Golden Eagle, for those that don't know me, I married Kimberly Tyner, who's the Fayette native. I grew up in Tennessee, met her in Auburn, and happened to buy Golden Eagle to help Vic Heron one Saturday, and I thought, this is the coolest place ever. And Vic said, it ain't cool if you got to come to it today. And I was like, I want a chance. If you ever sell this, I sure wanted to buy it. And he said, get out of here. Because I think the Pattersons, the Judge, and then Vic and Trent were the three. And then I know the Pattersons family themselves, once he died, the daughter and her husband had it for a little bit. So it's not been in very many hands, and it's tradition from Fayette. And I work construction for my main form of living, and so I travel basically Rockies East, Canada down is where we work. And so I was in Texas at the time, and Kimberly called me and said, Vic and Trent selling the plant, and they didn't offer it to you. Well, I dialed up Vic Heron on the phone, and I said, what's up with this? And he said, well, I don't even remember the man's name, I don't even know where he's from. But he was somehow related to the Pattersons, and they had always sort of told him, but tried and tried, they just never came to whatever an agreement. And I said, that's time for me, let me have my chance now. And so Kimberly goes, why do you want a syrup? What do you want a syrup plant? You didn't even grow up, with it. And I was like, well, it's just nostalgia. And it's the same with the building downtown, is that I didn't want to see Golden Eagle leave Fayette. It's not just a brand. It's not just, to be absorbed by somebody else and still be on the shelf, but it doesn't have the behind it. Not that anybody can't make it, just they knew the secret, but it's just something I want to keep because I like small town. And I grew up in a town bigger than Fayette, but not much bigger. But definitely not as small as we lived at the junction. So I just walked in to my office. I was working for a large construction company, and my partner, we have a partner, John and Joy Blevins. He was like a mentor to me at the construction company because he had all daughters and he didn't have a son. So he sort of took me in, and I was sitting there, and he goes, what are you studying on? And I was like, well, I want to buy this Golden Eagle syrup, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. And he said, you want a partner? And I was like, you want to buy a Golden Eagle? I didn't even know John's connection to Fayette. He knew the Freemans. In fact, he bought his vehicles from the Freemans. And when I went out there, I saw it on the back of the Suburban. I was like, yeah, Mike Freeman Chevrolet on it. But they had known him. He said, well, I better ask my wife. And I was like, well, that probably would be good. But she said yes. And so we purchased it and had no idea. I mean, the Vic and Trent and their father/father-in-law, Mr. Heron, he gave us some written instructions, but we had Annie and Miss Martha, and so we spent 3 years trying to learn how to do what we do, and then wanted to grow it. But it's a hard thing in this day and age because most people don't eat breakfast anymore. Most people don't eat anything that's they have to cook. They pick it up from somewhere or they grab and go, right? 60% of our business is done in the fourth quarter. So families come home, you have meals, right? You're home for the holidays, they're cooking, the families are having breakfast, they're cooking in the pies, they're baking. So it was just dwindling. And we're like, well, what can we do with the SKU, another product that would still hold true to Mr. Patterson? Because Mr. Patterson did start it in his kitchen and then moved into a little building right behind their house. I can't remember exactly how many years he was there, 8, 9, 1942 is when he moved into the building that we're in right now. And he named it Golden Eagle because he thought the quality was the best, and the eagle was a high-flying bird, and the golden, of course, for the color. And we wanted to remain true to that, not just put Golden Eagle on relish or ketchup or whatever. But so Kimberly had caramel corn, and I was like, we could make caramel corn and sell it, but how do you do that? I don't know. We talked about it for what, a year, and finally 2 years. So finally we loaded it up in the truck and we drove to Chicago and bought a badge to go in this, what they call co-packers. In other words, people that'll make products for you. But everywhere I walked around, I said, I want to make caramel corn, and they're like, well, if we make caramel corn, we can put your name on it. And I'm like, no, I want you to make my recipe, and I want you to use my syrup. They're like, we don't do that. We're not really set up to do that. We need to make our recipe. We can tweak it a little bit, but we just want to use our syrup. And I was like, no, I want to use the Golden Eagle syrup. I don't want to just use whatever you have. And so we finally found one. We went all the way to Chicago to find a guy in Memphis. And and the guy in Memphis they have their own snack food thing, but he was receptive and knew a little bit of who we were in terms of the brand. But we were second fiddle sort of to his production, right? And so it was hard, and there was some consistencies in the quality, because Mr. Patterson, he was proud of the quality that he put out, and that's what we wanted it to be. And so the recipe, Kimberly came up with the recipe, and she used to she'd take it to the football games, she'd take it to the Thursday night dinners, and we take it to people, and I take it to construction sites, and guys that don't even have to talk good about it, they would sit there and eat the whole bag and want another one, or hide it from when I had them to a couple of them. So I said, well, this is good. And Mr. Patterson and Miss Patterson came up with that recipe and tweaked it. So here's something that Kimberly came up with, and we're going to tweak it. And so that went on, and y'all noticed the caramel corn came out for about a year and a half, or whatever, and then it was in a different bag, and it was a little bit different, and it wasn't consistent. And so then I got introduced to a man in Chicago. So but he's Frank Ems. Frank Ems is his name. Frank Strong is his name, and Ems is his company, and they're a little family company. But all they do is coat popcorn. And he said, Temple, whatever recipe you want to send me. And so we make up the liquid part in Fayette, and we load it into these 220-gallon totes, and we ship it up to or outside of Chicago, and he coats it for us. And something that's a little fact, if you want to do it, there's only 2 places really that you can get popcorn in America. And most people don't pop their own popcorn anymore. I learned that he said, because you got to deal with waste. He said, we just buy the popcorn already popped. He said, there's only 2 places really you get popcorn, and that way you don't have to worry about bad batches, burnt batches, unpopped kernels. You don't have to worry about the mess. You just buy good popcorn. And these guys are making it in so much, you cannot compete with trying to do the thing. Well, then the next thing I got, when we were doing this, they were like, well, you got to sell it for $1.89. And I was like, why do I got to sell it for $1.89? Well, that's what you got to do to pick the Cracker Jacks. And I'm like, well, that's cardboard. I don't want to eat Cracker Jacks. I said, I'm not worried about the price. I want to, whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. It's not going to be as cheap as Cracker Jacks because we're not big enough in that production, but it's a fair price and a quality product. That's what Mr. Patterson had always promoted. And so Frank and them are very consistent, and they're very accommodating, and it's nice to work with a small company. And so that really has taken off well. And in fact, it's almost caught up to the sales of the syrup with just the caramel corn. And so we've been 2 years, Kimberly, with the new 2 years. And I didn't like the package. Somebody else had drawn the package up, so I went and bought a dough illustrator and said, we're going to design a package that we're just going to do it ourselves. And then they go like with the box. You look back there, you see that box. Most people don't ship it, but in a white box with the label. But I'm like, well, I love the old crates, right? I love the old stickers. I love the old advertising type things. And I said, I'm labeling these boxes up, and people can go to grocery stores using stuff and they go, you could save 20 cents a box if you didn't. And I'm like, well, no, I want to be proud enough that it's on the name, and that has multiple uses. It can be used as displays, and people do use it and like it, and our customers like it for displays in their stores. And so we started thinking, well, we've got to keep growing this business. We're sort of bursting at the seams. We got the lot next to us. The mayor and the city helped us with the little alleyway, and then of course COVID hit and building materials tripled, and so we're waiting for reality to come back a little bit, hopefully, that in pricing. But we need more warehouse space, and I've always wanted to bring pecan pies, and we brought y'all a treat. We are bringing pecan pies to the market this fall, and we, on the same lines of what Mr. Patterson did, you can get pecan pie anywhere, And the same thing with the caramel corn. We want you to make our recipe, and we want you to care about our recipe, and we don't want to just be a pie coming off an assembly line with our name on it or our package. And so it was a little bit of divine intervention on this. Several times I've gone down the road and tried to get some people to work with me on the pecan pies, and never did. Well, we have a gentleman that sells a lot of caramel corn in Mississippi. He ran into, and I don't even know how he ran into her, but he ran into somebody from Whaley Pecan and said, he called me, or he called Kimberly and said, hey, you got a Temple of Color, I think this might be the one. And they're a family-owned company. Been around since 1935. They're in Troy, Alabama. And Kimberly and I drove down there, and this is the final batch. This is the recipe that's going to actually be coming to production this thing, but they don't make them on assembly lines. They hand make them. And Miss Jo is their head baker, and they have 2 or 3. I mean, they've got some assembly line for the packaging that you can load them in there, and it seals and does all that. So they're not like they're not automated, but they care. And we spent, what, 8 hours in their plant, 9 hours in their plant with the different things, and to see the family type business structure, and that's what we tried to do is partner, so that, you know, some of the places we sell our stuff and do our stuff, it probably cost us money to take the caramel corn there, but like we want people to be able to have it, and you feel bad, and they used to get it this way, and so Kimberly drives to, there's a place in Tuscaloosa, and it costs me more money than she takes caramel corn every time we go, because she comes back with a truckload of Alabama products from other things, and I was like, why don't you quit selling caramel corn then? You're going to spend that much, maybe that's why they ordered the caramel corn, just to give her a shot. But Kimberly makes the syrup, makes every batch. Miss Annie was the only, I don't know how many people have said, there was a couple articles in the paper, but Miss Annie was the only one that cooked the syrup before we owned it, and maybe even before Dick and Trent owned it. She was the cook. And so, and we had a vacuum pump that Miss Annie was the only one that could operate. They had this big head thing that would have to come down, and the vacuum pump would pull the syrup into glass jars. And if you were too hard, you break your glass. If you're too soft, you blow syrup everywhere. You can't get a vacuum. And if you just regular, you can't do it quick enough for the syrup. Just to give a few things, everybody knows the color, but the color has to be, we have to jar it in a certain time frame, or you're going to have dark syrup, because the heat will continue to caramelize the sugars. So you can't be slow when you're going from, hey, it's finally done, to we need to be in the jars. We have about 2 hours. And Kimberly could run the machine, but she could not do it in production. And Miss Annie, I said, Miss Annie, show me again. And Miss Annie showed me, and then it finally broke. And I called the company and said, hey, I need to get this pulley. And they said, what's your serial number? And I said, 518. And she said, what's the rest of the numbers? And I was like, 518. She said, I don't think you're getting all the numbers. And I said, yes, ma'am. And I said, she says, is there any other numbers on it? And there was a couple of little things on it, and I read to her, and she called me back in a couple of days. She goes, well, you were right. She says, that was made in 1951. And I was like, can I get a part? She says, we promise to have parts for anything we've ever made. I said, awesome. She goes, you don't want to pay the bill. And I was like, oh, she goes, we promise to have them. We don't promise that they're cost effective. She goes, we would have to make the parts by hand in a machine shop. And we hope they would be right. We can't guarantee they'd be right, but we would do them until they were right. And I was like, well, this is not going to work. And so John and I loaded up and went to Atlanta, Georgia, from a guy that told us, I don't even know how we met that guy. He came in one day, I think. We just went to this, and the guy goes, what do you need to load? And I said, I need this syrup. It's thick. And that's another reason we're limited in time, is because if it's too thick, you can't pull it. Even we use a piston pump filler now instead of a vacuum pump filler. And so John and I, John's a civil engineer by trade. I do construction engineering. We tinkered around, and we figured out a new filler that actually probably twice as fast as Miss Annie was with hers. And Miss Annie thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, because all she had to do was watch it. So that's really the only automation that we've added, but there's a thing that we take pride in, well, not, I don't know if pride, but it's a neat thing to say, is every jar is hand tightened. Because the capping machine is about as possessed as a machine can be. It has a mind of its own, and if you let it try to tighten it, y'all will never get the jars off, because one of the things about Golden Eagle as well is it pulls its own vacuum on the jar, because as it cools, it condenses. And that's another reason that if you'll notice, those are 16-ounce jars of syrup. We learned this, but there's only 15 ounces is what we sell them as, because as it cools, it settles, and we don't sell them weight. Most everybody's changed to net weight ounces. We still sell them 8 ounces. And so the state of Alabama had told Dick and Trent, you're not quite getting 16 ounces in here, because as it cools, it shrinks, but you can't put any more in it when it's hot than what's there. So people always go, what's in a 16-ounce jar? I mean, it's got a 15 ounce, that's 1 ounce free. But so these jars, when it pulls the vacuum, if the machine did it all the way, it would be too tight for you to get off. And if we leave it loose enough on the machine, what we think, to pull the vacuum usually ends up leaking, just because if one turns over. But that machine likes to every now and then turn over a jar of 190 degree Golden Eagle syrup on a hardwood floor. So we that's one of the reasons that we want to expand, to get, even though it's nice to be on the hardwood floors, I don't know how the health department still passes, because I think we're just grandfathered in. Kimberly and the girls spend so much time scrubbing and cleaning those floors, but it'd be nice if you could just put a hose out and have a little concrete or something. But we don't want it to change, and that's we want to add things that, you know, one day you're selling enough that you can bring the actual production back to Fayette, you know, to have even more jobs. Right now we have 2 or 3 girls that work there with Miss Martha, and our daughter is coming back. She graduates from college Saturday, and she's going to come back and hopefully be a little more horsepower to stay at increasing other SKUs and other things that we can grow the Golden Eagle brand while maintaining the tradition of Mr. Patterson. Are there any questions or